Good morning, afternoon, evening, and welcome to Concerned Citizens Presents, a new offering on Village TV. Concerned Citizens of Laguna Woods is an organization committed to peace, social justice, economic equality, and a clean environment. For the duration of the lockdown, instead of its usual 2 meetings a month, Concerned Citizens will broadcast 2 programs a month on this channel. Our programs will feature films, lectures, and debates on topics related to our mission. We hope you enjoy today's program.
All right. Yes. Oh, were you here?
It's not exactly a question, it's a comment. I think that anti-Semitism, in a way, involuntarily begins in the home. And not because we teach our children to be anti-Semitic. We don't teach them enough about our religion and all the good things that we believe in, and all the ways we help other people, and all our everything, our wonderful history and everything. And what this does is it doesn't give the children a strong enough identity of being a Jew and being proud of being a Jew. And I think that's very, very important. I'm not going to criticize intermarriage because that's a real touchy subject. I told him it wasn't a question.
Right. So no, I appreciate. So right, one of the opportunities is right. Every group, including the Jewish community, right, has to talk about like how do we instill our own identity, even though it's not monolithic. It varies, right, such that we become really great ambassadors for ourselves and help build allies in the community around us. So it's a really important point.
I would like to know, what is your exact activity in the elementary school to reach the child of that age?
Right. So our work in elementary schools, right, which is consistent with our work sort of throughout in K to 12, is one, let's work with the teachers, because the kids come and go, but the teachers are always there. So let's help the teachers use the right language and understanding about diversity, about the different folks in the students and their circumstances in their classrooms, so the teachers can become more welcoming. They might be great English teachers, history teachers, coaches, right? They might be wonderful classroom teachers, but they might not know a lot about how bias plays a role and about diversity in the classroom. So our expertise and experience, so we work with teachers. That's one. Secondly, we also work with in schools where we have a framework that's called No Place for Hate. You can see I'm wearing my No Place for Hate pin here. Or maybe you can't. You need really good eyes to see what that says. But so we also have a framework called No Place for Hate, where schools, all the stakeholders, students, faculty, administrators, and parents, all 4 stakeholders come together to create programming that impacts the entire school, not once or twice, but throughout the year. So then schools become designated No Place for Hate schools, where they know their own issues in their own schools, whether or not it might be race, it might be body image, it might be economic. So they will try and address the different issues that divide their school and come up with the remedies themselves within the stakeholders. So that's another way. And then thirdly, how we work in schools is when there are incidents, we go in to not look back, but to look forward on what we can do to work with the faculty, with the teachers, with the students to ensure that it doesn't happen again. So that's how we work in grammar schools, elementary schools, but also middle and high schools in the same spirit.
I want to say thank you for coming tonight. And I have a question. There are flags in our community that are hanging off of balconies. They say, "Down with Banyan." I think Banyan.
Yeah. So
A lot of people don't know what that means.
So, all right, so it's the Let's Go Brandon signs.
Oh, right, that's it.
So, right, so there's what we call, what's a popular term these days has been called a dog whistle. So there's certain language and symbols and sayings that are very meaningful for certain groups that many people don't even know what it means, so they don't even know to be offended with it. So let's go Brandon, right? There was during a NASCAR race, there was after the race, an interviewer from the media was interviewing one of the drivers. And the person who won the race was Brandon, forgetting his last name. Brown? Was it Brandon Brown? I can't remember. Anyways, and when they were, during the interview, the people behind started chanting F Joe Biden. And the reporter heard, "Let's go Brandon," and said, "Oh, they're chanting 'Let's go Brandon,' like, because you just won the race and you're Brandon," right? So the folks, so that became sort of adopted by sort of certain aspects of the sort of Trump extremists, right? So they say, "Let's go Brandon" instead of F Joe Biden. So that's what that comes from. But that's just, once again, another. Some of the banners are explicit. They actually say F Biden, you know. So here becomes a challenge, right?
Let's stop.
And what did the administration and board say when you contacted them? We'll look into it. So one of the challenges, right, unless if it violates your CCNRs here and your HOA agreements, right, people have a right to free speech and have a right to free expression, even when it's offensive or grotesquely offensive, right? That hate speech is constitutionally protected in this country. So it becomes a good question. So here becomes, this is when, right, there might be nothing you can do about someone who hangs a banner, right? Because it might just be their right to do that. So the question is, how is the community going to respond? So this is why, how do we get to know our neighbors, and what coalition can come together, and how can we expose, right, Let's Go Brandon and what that stands for as being, problematic. But maybe some people think that's just political speech. So, but these become really sort of community questions, right? People get the same way could hang a Nazi banner, right? It's as protected as hanging a Christmas banner or an Easter banner or a Passover banner, right? You know, people have those silkies they like to hang in their at their homes. It's as constitutionally protected as hanging an American flag. So what can we do? So how does a community express its values? Right, and this is where the conversation comes in, and this is where not just you here, part of the concerned citizens, but really working with the other marginalized groups here, finding the other people who are feel targeted from these messages about how can we have a communal response, how can we talk to our elected leaders, how can we talk to our management company to create and express our values. If they're going to exercise bad speech, where am I going to exercise good speech? On Channel 6, in the Globe, at city council meetings, creating new clubs and coalitions working together. Where am I going to exercise my good speech to counterbalance that bad speech? Right? So that becomes the task. It's not easy. It takes a little bit of work, but it's your community. It's our country. It's worth it. Yes?
You've showed us a number of examples tonight of things that are going on in our community that I suspect most of us here know nothing about. Here's my question about the schools. As a part of their regular curriculum, do they show things like this to show these kids going to school, what's actually going on in their community and how they should be dealing with it? I want to know if this is a regular part of their curriculum.
So, right, it's a great question of what is the civics curriculum that we have in our public schools here in California, right? What do they have to learn? So, for example, Holocaust studies is mandated, but what is it? Is it one lecture, a part of a lecture? Is it a class? Is it a week? How that gets instituted, there's no consistency, and there's no curriculum, and there's no guidelines. It's just sort of a broad statement. So, and the idea that civics should be taught about how to be a citizen, how to be involved and engaged in your community, what matters, how to express yourself, right? We'd like to, but that wouldn't happen until older grades, right? So it becomes a real good question about how schools model that and what they do. So no, is it mandated that they see and learn this stuff? No. Do lots of schools choose to address bigotry and bullying and do something to prevent it? Yes. Some do. Certainly more can. And let's be honest, our schools, right, they're underfunded. Teachers and administrators are underpaid and overworked, and they have so many important things. So, but your voice helps, if this is really one of the issues, elevates it in our local schools, right? When the community says, we want to see more of this, right, then your local school boards will make it happen, right, to bring in bullying prevention type education, anti-bullying. Yes.
I'm not sure if this is going to be an answerable question, but
Green. Now you have to ask the right question.
yeah. You stress as one of your suggestions to speak to our elected leaders, okay? And we have a very divided country right now. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was voted into the Supreme Court unanimously. Scalia was voted into the Supreme Court unanimously. Our latest African-American woman was voted in, I think it was 56 to 42, which says to me that we have inherent racism within our elected leadership. How do you deal with that? How do you talk to that?
So we have increased polarization in this country politically, right, which is fueled often by what we're seeing online, social media, what we're seeing in cable networks, right? There's lots of, it's not just one reason why we're seeing, sort of increased polarization. Some of that, right, does feed into what we would call racism and bigotry. A lot of it is political. I don't want to jump into the whole challenges of democratic society that we're facing now. But you're right. How do we deal with that? It's a real challenge. But if we don't talk to our elected leaders and we don't, right, vet the people we're voting for, right, we're certainly, by abstaining from the problem, right, isn't going to help it. So, will that solve everything? God, I hope it helps. But that's why it's so important, right, for the elected leaders to know your values, to know where you stand, right, and hold them accountable, right? Throw them out of office. Now I know we have a system that if you're an incumbent, right, it's easier to raise money, it's easier to actually get out of office and make a lot of money, right? You have name recognition on the ballots. I know there are a lot of challenges. The way gerrymandering has been done, California has an independent commission that does it, so we're a little protected. But North Carolina and Texas don't. So, it becomes very partisan. So, right, we have lots of advantages that we live here in California about trying to depoliticize that lots of states don't have. But it's a real problem and it's a real challenge. And the idea is, yes, I don't know how we can change that, and we can only vote for one person in our district, but so how do we support institutions and organizations that are really caring about, let's say, voting rights? So we need a dozen multi-pronged approach to help secure our democracy. And I don't know about you, but I grew up thinking that American democracy was really robust. I thought, it's so strong in this country. It is really incredible. And what I've learned, over the past 15 years is that, and more so over the past few years, is that our democracy is much more fragile than I thought. And that it takes constant, right, bolstering and tinkering to keep it propped up. And it's probably always been that case, but more so now, it's been so clear to me that we can't take our democratic institutions for granted, right? Freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, a multi-party system where the other side is not considered criminal, right? It's almost now considered criminal and death to your political career if you compromise and work with people across the aisle. That's, how did we get to that, right? Why we're like democracy beta version, for those who like technology, right? Most modern democracies in the world right? Our democracy 2.0, 2.3, right? They have ranked ballot voting. They have nonpartisan establishments on voting districts. There's so many things that this country has not embraced. So we got to continue to work at that. And there's lots of institutions and organizations, and ADL is just one of them that is working to fight for the democratic institutions that make this country great, but need a robust, active support to keep it going, such that we don't end up with this, horrific polarization. Yes. So I don't have an answer, but keep trying.
Yeah, I was just wondering the statistics, and thank you, Rabbi, for the informative. Unfortunately, too much hate is going on, but how would you compare the statistics here to other countries? Have they had that kind of a comparison? The numbers are going up everywhere, is my guess.
Yeah, so, right, it's a great question, and I'd love to refer you to the ADL website to look that up, because we do have some statistics from partner organizations. But yes, we're seeing this sort of this polarization of politics, this increase of hate, this nativism is a rise in much of the Western world. So when we look, just look at the elections in France, right? But look what's happening in Hungary. Right? Look what's happening in Italy, right? So we're seeing, all sorts of populist movements, gaining a lot of currency, and what that does to, Western forms of democracy. So I don't have all the numbers, but yes, it's pretty, this didn't start in the United States, and it didn't start with Donald Trump, right? There was something that was tapped into, in this country and others, that was tapped into this type of populism, right? That has sort of increased, that's, statistically, we actually, in the United States, for example, in anti-Semitism, according to our we have a survey to assess whether or not someone harbors anti-Semitic beliefs, and that always hovers between about 11 and 14% of the population. And that hasn't changed for about a generation now. But what we're seeing is that small percentage of the population, and 11 to 14, when you're looking at 340 million people, is not trivial, right? That's a lot of people. But they're more emboldened. What they used to, stay hidden, their ideas and thoughts, they're now sharing publicly. When we had some extremists running for office, they ran as strange third-party candidates. But now extremists are running in mainstream parties, right? There's somehow this idea that now is the time for us to seize the public. Let's hang some banners over the 405 freeway and see who we can drive to our websites and join us on this journey. Let's create cable news networks and stations, right? And get our ideas out there, and let's mainstream them. Even the American Nazi Party took the swastika off their banner, because the swastika, it's got too much bad PR. They replaced it with an Othala rune, right? The runic symbols, which is sort of early European, the runes. Anyways, in all of these are in attempts, right? Back in the 90s, and if I was going to talk about a neo-Nazi, you would expect some tattooed skinhead. But now when we talk about a neo-Nazi, we talk about someone wearing a suit and a tie with a fashionable haircut, often called a fascie. Brad Pitt made it famous in a movie. And they create institutes called the National Policy Institute, and they bring like-minded people together. But these are white supremacists. But they call themselves white nationalists, or European heritage we're protecting. Right? They have a whole new language and a whole new way to talk about it, but it's really the same ideas. And they're inspiring some people to violence because they're normalized this. And the online world, right, and so many kids and young generations, we in this room probably spend much too much time online. Right? Probably a lot more than you did 30 years ago. Oh, because you weren't online 30 years ago. But you were a full-fledged adult, and we're still busy then. But now imagine the hours that we spend online. And there are these cesspools online where where anti-Semites and racists are made into heroes, and people think that they actually have popular support because they live in echo chambers and in systems where these hateful extremist ideas are completely normal, are the norm. So then when they go out in the community, they think they're going to be heroes. They think they're going to be lionized for what they do. So this is our challenge. Yes?
Rabbi, thank you so very much. My name is Marilyn Long, and I'm a new and very proud member of this group, and I thank you so much for your insights and comments. I had a question thinking back to your early remarks where you had the time.
I'll just keep talking. It happened to me too. Here, this one works well.
Thank you. Oh, okay. I was too loud? Never too loud. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi, in many ways. I was thinking back to the timeline that you showed at the beginning of your talk, where you were showing incidents of anti-Semitism rising, but then there's a spike, and then there's another spike, and another spike. If you overlaid on that graph a graph of things that were happening politically or economically or socially, would there be any correlation? Are there things, in a sense, that trigger anti-Semitism to such a profound degree?
So the coronavirus, right, based on its origins and where it spread from, right, took this as an opportunity to hate a new foreigner class, Asian. Right? So it was just, we already hated them because they're not white American, but now we're going to be able to blame the pandemic on them. And the business of the pandemic on the Jews. Right? So with the murder of George Floyd, we saw the largest social justice movement in the history of this earth. Right? Something like over 24 million Americans marched. And we saw this around the world, people marching to defeat racism, right? In our criminal justice system, in our economic system, right? But it also became an opportunity to increase anti-black hatred. After 9/11, right, of which no Americans and no American Muslims or Arabs were a part of that. But the extremists and the bigots used this as an opportunity. So what we see people fleeing to this country, asylum seekers, refugees, fleeing persecution, oppression in their home countries, right? Much like, to be honest, how many people in this room would tell that same story of your ancestors who came to this country? Fleeing oppression and persecution and devastation, right? Looking for opportunities. Same story of these people coming to this country use this as an opportunity to sort of demonize, you know, the Mexicans coming over the border, right? As drug dealers and rapists and murderers, right? So, which we also know statistically, most of those immigrants commit less crimes than people born in the United States. So, extremist bigots never miss an opportunity. So it's true for anti-Semitism, but it's also true for anti-Asian hate, anti-black hate, anti-Muslim hate. So we see this over and over again.
We're going to have one more question, and then I'm sure the Rabbi, will you be willing to stay here for a little while if people want to come up and talk to you? Absolutely. Okay. One more question.
Well, thank you very much, and I agreed with almost everything that you said today. So I'm going to One of the slides that you showed us was dealing with the UC Irvine the student government. I believe they passed a resolution in favor of what's called BDS, which for people who I know almost probably everybody here knows, but it's boycott, divest, and sanction. It's a movement to well, people will say it's a movement to without killing everybody, change Israel, the state of Israel's policy. Now, I know a lot of people who believe in BDS who are not anti-Semitic, myself included, as far as what I know about it. The other side of the coin is there are a lot of people who vociferously defend and support Israel who are anti-Semites. They do it for their own particular religious reason. So how do you choose, where's the line? How do you choose your enemies? Are you transactional or?
My advice is, make your enemies your friend. Hear their story, let them hear your story. And right, because no one whose story you know can be your enemy. Right, that's for sure. So yes, there are lots of Christian Zionists that see Israel as part of a fulfillment for Jesus' second coming. So they see the Jews returning to their homeland really as utility for them eventually being wiped out in the kingdom on earth, right? So, it's like people are going to believe what people believe. The question is, who are you going to be in coalition with and who you're going to support, right? So be selective. Yes, do politicians and lots of communities make pragmatic decisions? Yes, right? So, Israel's in a tough place now. Not now we're trying to do too much politics, but with the war with Ukraine and Russia, right? Israel has not condemned Russia for it, right? And they've been called to task about that. Zelensky himself has asked them to do it. But Israel's in a really precarious place, and they're making what they consider a pragmatic decision. Because in order to keep sort of Iranian bombs out of Syria, that they have a sort of an unwritten agreement with Russia when they're going to go in and sort of do military action in Syria to prevent. So the Russians stay out, even though Russia technically supports the Syrian regime. So anyways, there's a whole notion about the Middle East. Russia is a huge player in the Middle East. Israel is in the Middle East in their neighborhood. So they have a very bizarre relationship that I don't know if any of us, fully understand and appreciate. So it becomes one of those questions about, if they piss off Russia too much, right, is it going to be a domino effect in other parts of the Middle East, which can create other problems? So how do you make those pragmatic decisions? So governments do that all the time. The United States does that too, right, in our relationships with Saudi Arabia, with our relationship with Russia itself, and, our changing relationship with Ukraine. So and with NATO. So there's lots of pragmatic decisions, right? Why the U.S., right, the way we're showing support, we can do this, we can't do that. So there's lots of pragmatic decisions that are made. So I don't blame institutions and countries when they make their pragmatic decisions. I hope that they're doing it with good intent, and I might disagree, and then I'll take them to task on policy. When it comes to boycott, divest, and sanction of Israel, right, the overwhelming majority of folks who support that see that as a peaceful means to put pressure on Israel to change policies. The leaders and the creators of the movement see Israel as an illegitimate country that should not exist at all and has no right to exist. And they're the ones who are perpetuating these attacks on Jewish identity, right? So now you have students who think that Israel has nothing to do with Jewish people's identity. And they think that Judaism is simply only a religion, right? But the Jewish people are much older than the separation of church and state, 200 years. Jewish people, 3,000 years, right? So, look, I can do a semester class on this, right? And still not cover all the topics. So you're right, the overwhelming majority of people, right? And in fact, the overwhelming majority of North American non-Orthodox Jews, right, 90% of the Jews in this country support a two-state solution, support that Palestinians should have an independent sovereign state living in safety and security next to an Israel, in a Jewish state. The leaders and founders of BDS don't believe that. They don't believe there's any room for a Jewish state. That's where the chant from the river to the sea, right? It's like, they're like, well, if the river, the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, then there's no place for a Jewish state. So the question is, how do two people with the claim to the same piece of property figure out how to live side by side? Now, the French and English, learned how, they would have killed each other in the street, 300 years ago. They learned to live side by side, and now they got a channel connecting them. So it's going to happen, but it's really difficult and ugly right now. And, once again, you do not have to support one policy of the Israeli government to say that the Jewish people and the Palestinian people each deserve to have their own state in some portion of their historic homeland. And we got to figure it out. That is not a contradiction, despite people on both fringes. Both ends of the right and the left of the spectrum will reject that. But the overwhelming majority of us in the middle, the overwhelming majority know that that's possible. So, yes. I don't know if that's exactly an answer or a response. So when the sun went down tonight, for the Jewish people, we entered into what we call Yom HaZikaron, which means the Day of Remembrance. It's a day... It's a modern day of commemoration for the Jewish people that began after the modern state of Israel was created in 1948, right? For all the Israeli... Oh, here we go. The battery died on that one. That's why it ended. So where we look at the past and realize the death and destruction and try and honor those folks who did it. That is this next 24-hour period of time that happened when sunset today. Sunset tomorrow, they celebrates Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day. It's important for us to recognize that there's another narrative, that's also the Nakba, right? When the Jewish people got their state, it also meant that the Palestinian people, part of their historic homeland, was no longer theirs. Right? Even though 20% of the Israeli population are Israeli Arabs or Israeli Palestinians with full rights, but those who don't live in that land, right? So we have a lot of narratives that happen out of that Holy Land. But we have to remember the past so then we can celebrate what we need going forward. That's why the Jewish calendar goes from the Day of Remembrance to a day of celebration of independence. What we have to do is figure out how to get independence, right, for Jews and Palestinians in that land, and independence and freedom for the diversity here in Laguna Woods, whether or not you're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, atheist, agnostic, humanist, whether or not your origin is Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, or Jewish, or white Christian European, or black, or the other diversity that's here, right? We need to come to a place, honor the fights that have happened in the past, and figure out how we can celebrate everyone's independence and cooperation here together in the future. So, pleasure being with you all.